London, May 19th, 1536. A gray sky settled over the Tower of London. In the inner courtyard, a scaffold made of light-colored wood stood tall, erected overnight. But this wasn't your usual scaffold with a high platform. No, it was a shorter structure, made for something unique. A foreign executioner and his favored tool, a sharp sword. Not the typical English axe. People started to gather. Whispers floated through the air. Today, a queen will be executed, the first in England's history. Anne Boleyn, the woman behind the break with Rome and a revolution in the kingdom, was about to face her fate. Just this morning, locked inside the tower for 17 long days, she woke to her last moments. At 35, she still held an elegance that once mesmerized the most powerful king in England. Her loyal ladies-in-waiting helped her get dressed. Anne chose a dark gray mantle lined with fur, underneath which she wore a crimson bodice, colors that wouldn't give away what was to come. It was a choice both smart and dignified. "I hear the executioner is very good. I have a little neck," Anne said with grace, lightly touching her throat. This line, noted by those who were there, showed not just her bravery, but also a dark twist of fate. How did Anne Boleyn find herself in this tragic spot? Born to Thomas Boleyn, a driven diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard of noble lineage, Anne spent part of her youth in the cultured French court. There, she soaked up the Renaissance's beauty and sophistication. When she returned to England around 1522, she wasn't seen as a great beauty. With her olive skin, black hair, and dark eyes, she didn't fit the era's idea of beauty. But she had something far more precious: a keen mind, fluency in languages, and an undeniable charm that drew people in. When Henry VIII cast his gaze upon her, desperate for a male heir from his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Anne wouldn't take the easy path of her sister Mary Boleyn, who had already been the king's mistress. "I won't be your concubine," she reportedly declared to the king. "If you want my heart and body, you must give me a crown." It was a bold gamble, one that would change English history forever. For 7 years, from 1526 to 1533, Henry pursued Anne with an obsession that would lead him to break with the Catholic Church. The Church named itself the top authority of the new Church of England, facing backlash from the Pope and Emperor Charles V. This changed how religion worked in England. In January 1533, Anne and Henry secretly tied the knot when she was already expecting. By September, she gave birth to a girl, much to the king's disappointment. This little girl would grow up to be Queen Elizabeth I. Anne's time as queen lasted just 3 years, but her influence was huge. Smart and sharp, she pushed for religious changes, supported scholars, and shared English translations of the Bible that others had banned. To some, she was a visionary, but to many more, she was a manipulative heretic. Things turned sour when she struggled to have more children. After Elizabeth, she became pregnant again, but sadly had a miscarriage in 1534. A third pregnancy in 1535 ended the same way, this time with a baby boy. For a king obsessed with having a male heir, these losses were simply unacceptable. As Henry's affection faded, Anne's enemies, especially Thomas Cromwell, the king's top advisor, grew bolder. By April 1536, the plot to take down Anne picked up speed. Cromwell led an investigation into her alleged misbehavior. On May 2nd, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The charges against her were serious but ridiculous: adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, and conspiring against the king. Her trial on May 15th was a sham. She had no right to legal representation or to face her accusers. The tribunal stacked against her was filled with political rivals. Still, Anne stood her ground and spoke eloquently. One witness noted she answered questions so wisely that she seemed more like an angel than a woman. But it didn't matter. The verdict was set before the trial even started. Guilty, with a sentence of death by burning. The usual fate for treasonous women. In a final act of mercy, or maybe just to keep the peace, Henry changed her sentence to beheading and ordered a skilled French executioner to perform it, ensuring it would be quick and relatively painless. Now, on May 19th, 1536, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Anne learned her execution had been delayed until noon. It was a cruel twist, as she had already mentally prepared for what was to come. Anne spent additional time in prayer. Witnesses said she took communion and paused often to cry out, "Lord, have mercy on me." At one point, she swore on the sacred host that she never betrayed the king, declaring, "For my salvation, I am free of the charges against me." When noon struck, drums began to beat. Anne bid farewell to her ladies, giving each a small gift, a prayer book, a handkerchief, a piece of jewelry. "Remember me and how I end," she asked them as she was led to the scaffold. The crowd, smaller than expected, numbered around 1,000. There was a strange, almost respectful vibe in the air. Most people took off their hats when Anne appeared, dressed in gray and crimson, walking with her usual grace. On the scaffold, Anne was allowed a final speech. Her words were thoughtful. "Good Christians, I come here to die according to the law, and I won't speak against it. I accuse no one nor discuss what I'm accused of. I pray God saves the king and gives him a long reign. There has never been a kinder, more merciful prince. To me, he was always a good and gentle lord." These words showed her strength. Even in the face of an unfair death, Anne didn't claim innocence or attack her enemies. It was a clever move. By showing loyalty to the end, she preserved the crown's dignity and safeguarded her daughter Elizabeth's future. After the speech, Anne took off her mantle and cap, handing them to her ladies. One of her last acts was to give a pouch of gold coins to the executioner, payment for his work. Then she knelt on the scaffold but saw there was no block to lay her head on. Unlike beheadings with an axe, swords required her to stay upright. A lady blindfolded her while Anne continued to pray, "Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul." The executioner, following a French tradition, tried to distract her. "Where is my sword?" he called out, though he had already positioned it. When Anne turned her head slightly, he struck with brutal precision. The blade cut through. The executioner made a swift cut, slicing through Anne Boleyn's neck. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then a collective sigh echoed from the crowd. The executioner grabbed her hair, lifting the head high as he declared, "So perish the king's enemies." But instead of cheers, there was just an uneasy murmur among the onlookers. At that same moment, a cannon boomed from the tower, signaling Henry VIII at Whitehall Palace that he was free to wed again. The very next day, he got engaged to Jane Seymour, and just 10 days later, they were married. Anne's body was gathered by her ladies, but in a brutal twist, there was no proper coffin. The guards improvised. They found an empty arrow chest, and Anne's body, with her head beside it, was taken to St. Peter ad Vincula Chapel within the tower. Without any tombstone or marker, she was buried in a nameless grave. Henry VIII ordered that all portraits of her be destroyed, her symbols removed from palaces, and her name wiped from records. This erasure of memory was so thorough that, to this day, there isn't a single verified portrait of Anne Boleyn. However, Henry's attempt to erase her presence fell flat. 23 years after her execution, her daughter, Elizabeth, took the throne. Elizabeth I would reign for 45 years, leading England into a golden age. She outshone her father in almost every way, bringing the stability Henry had desperately sought. In 1876, while restoring the chapel, bones were found where Anne was thought to be buried. Among them, a female skeleton with delicate bones and a small skull was likely identified as Anne's. These remains were buried again, this time with dignity. Now, a simple glass slab marks the spot of Anne's execution on the Tower of London lawn. Every year on the anniversary of her death, admirers leave roses there. For many, Anne Boleyn isn't just a tragic figure. She symbolizes the historical injustices faced by powerful women. Ironically, her true triumph came through the daughter Henry had deemed a disappointment. When Elizabeth I became queen, she intentionally embraced traits of her mother. She even took on the white falcon symbol of the Boleyn family. Learning from her mother's tragic story, Elizabeth chose not to marry. She called herself Mary to England instead. The Virgin Queen shaped her strong reign from the legacy of her mother's sacrifice. That sacrifice started on a grim May morning in 1536. When the Queen walked with grace to her fate,